She lost the only person she ever trusted, and no one knew how to bring her back. Experts wanted to sedate her, relocate her, or erase what she felt, as if grief could be caged. But Daniel's granddaughter, Hannah, had one last chance, and a memory strong enough to break through the silence. What happened next left the crowd in tears, and proved that even a broken soul can rise again when love remembers. The morning sun filtered gently through the tall pines of the Tallahassee Wildlife Sanctuary, casting golden threads across the wooden fences and soft earth. A quiet crowd had gathered near the memorial garden, some families with young children perched on their shoulders, others holding hands in respectful silence. In the center of it all stood Grace, 42 years old, massive and majestic, with skin like ancient parchment and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of worlds. She wasn't just an elephant here, she was history, a survivor, a symbol. And today, something in the air told everyone watching, this moment would not be forgotten. Grace moved slowly, deliberately, each step heavy but sure. Her caretakers watched tensely, unsure what she would do. Ever since Daniel Carter passed away, nothing about her behavior was predictable. She'd spent over 3 decades by his side, from the moment she was rescued as a frightened calf from Botswana, after her mother was lost to poachers, to her life as the sanctuary's most beloved resident. Daniel had raised her with kindness, patience, and an unwavering bond that defied explanation. He wasn't just a trainer, he was her family. In front of Grace stood a large canvas portrait of Daniel, mid-50s, tan skin, scruffy beard, his sanctuary uniform smudged with hay and dirt, smiling as if he'd just told one of his dry jokes only Grace understood. The second she saw the portrait, she stopped. The crowd grew still. She lifted her trunk, not erratic or nervous, but calm, almost reverent, and reached out. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was intimate, familiar. Her trunk hovered, then gently touched the canvas where Daniel's face was. She didn't move. Her entire body froze in place. And then it happened. A tear formed just beneath her right eye. It rolled slowly, cutting a clean line down her dusty cheek. One of the children whispered, "She's crying." But no one answered. They couldn't. Grown men stood stunned. Mothers covered their mouths. Some reached for tissues without looking away. In that tear, there was something ancient and human, a grief so raw, so unspoken, that it silenced even the wind. 2 years ago, Daniel had collapsed in her enclosure while offering her a crisp red apple, his favorite treat to share with her. He passed before help arrived. What followed wasn't just mourning, it was a breakdown. For days, Grace refused to eat. She struck her walls with her head and tusks. She made a sound, deep, low, vibrating through bone and soul, that no one had heard from her before. It wasn't anger, it was a call, a desperate, echoing call for someone who wouldn't return. Since then, she hadn't been the same. She didn't splash in the pond or play with tires like she once had. She didn't nudge the keepers for treats or lift her trunk to the school children, waving by the fence. It was like something inside her had turned to stone. Keepers tried music, toys, even other elephants, but she stayed silent. Grace had withdrawn, but today something shifted. As her trunk lingered on Daniel's portrait, her body softened, just barely. Her ears lowered. She exhaled, long, slow, like she was releasing a breath she'd held for years. And in that moment, it wasn't an elephant standing there. It was someone in mourning, someone remembering, someone forgiving. The crowd didn't applaud. It didn't feel right. Instead, they simply stood with her, watching, some in tears, some holding their breath, all united by something wordless and powerful. A woman in her 60s whispered, "She loved him." No one disagreed, because everyone could see it. This wasn't a show. It was a goodbye, or maybe the beginning of a new kind of memory. "She's still waiting for him," whispered a veteran zoologist, Brian McCrae, eyes fixed on the monitor's grainy footage. The screen showed Grace standing motionless in the far corner of her enclosure, swaying ever so slightly, like an old tree caught in windless grief. Brian had known her since the early 90s. He'd seen her grow from a frightened calf into the wise matriarch of the sanctuary. But he'd never seen her like this. Not hollow, not shattered. There was a pain in her posture that no medication could touch. The behavior team offered solutions. Psychologists suggested enrichment therapy, new puzzles, toys, maybe even sound recordings of other elephants. Vets proposed mild sedatives to ease her distress. And the administration, they began discussing transfer, a reset, they called it, a new facility, a new herd, something to reboot her broken mind. But Brian refused. He knew better. You don't fix a soul with protocol. You don't treat mourning like a sprain. What Grace needed wasn't distraction. She needed a connection, a thread to the only person she'd ever truly trusted. So Brian made a call. He reached out to Daniel's granddaughter, Hannah. Once, long ago, she used to play by Grace's side back when her giggles echoed off the trees, and Grace followed her like a giant shadow. But things had changed. Hannah had left the sanctuary after her grandfather's sudden passing, unable to face the place where every stone reminded her of his laugh, every fence post of his hand on her shoulder. His death hadn't just broken her heart. It had ripped her roots from the earth. Still, she came, hesitant, unsure, carrying the weight of years and a silence she didn't know how to break. When she stepped through the gate, Grace lifted her head, slowly, like she'd caught a scent on the breeze. Her ears perked, her body turned, and without a single command, she began to walk. The keepers froze. No one dared breathe. Grace approached her carefully, each step pressing a lifetime into the soil. For a heartbeat, tension shimmered in the air, an invisible thread pulled tight. And then, as Hannah's hand trembled, reaching forward, Grace lowered her trunk and touched her palm, soft, delicate, electric. It was the first real contact Grace had made in nearly 2 years. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes as Grace leaned closer, eyes half closed, like she was listening to a sound only she could hear. The moment seemed to stretch forever. A sigh of hope passed through the team watching from behind the gate. Maybe this was it. Maybe healing had finally begun. But then Hannah spoke. Just a few words, gentle, kind. But in her voice was something else, an echo. The timbre of Daniel's tone, his cadence, the rise and fall that Grace knew like her own heartbeat. The second it hit the air, something inside her cracked. Grace recoiled. Her trunk snapped back like burned. Her body tensed, legs stomping, breath heaving. A low, sharp cry burst from her throat, not of anger, but confusion, loss. She backed away. Fast. Trembling. Then in a blur, she charged, not at Hannah, but at the wall of the enclosure. The crash echoed like thunder. That night, Grace tore through part of the fencing. She refused food, refused sleep. The small hope that had flickered for a moment now felt like a cruel trick. The monitors caught one last image before going dark, Grace in the far corner, staring at the sky. Her trunk rose, slow and heavy, and then fell limp. From deep in her chest came a sound no one forgot, a cry. Not of rage, but of longing so old and pure it silenced everything around it. She wasn't angry. She was lost again. And this time, it felt like even the stars had turned away. That night, Hannah didn't leave. She stayed inside Grace's enclosure, curled up in the corner with her grandfather's old journal. She read aloud stories of childhood, of Daniel hiding sugar cubes in his pockets, of him singing old country songs off-key just to make Grace sway. Her voice was soft, trembling, but steady. Grace didn't come close, but she listened. She didn't walk away. By morning, as the sun spilled over the trees and staff began unlocking the park gates, Grace did something no one expected. She walked to the fence, calm, steady. And when she reached Hannah at the gate, she bowed, not out of training, but out of something deeper. Hannah broke down, hand trembling as she touched Grace's forehead. This time, Grace stayed. Later, during the memorial ceremony for Daniel, the crowd fell silent as new footage played. Grace splashing in the mud, Grace swimming again, Grace gently taking an apple from Hannah's hand. But what made the audience gasp was the last frame. Grace raising her trunk to the sky, strong, alive, free.